distinguished audience and friends, as I shared with you yesterday, we have it's just a inappropriate way of expressing battery of distinguished personalities amongst us, beginning from, if I begin from my left, Dr. Alka Pande, Rubina Karore, Anju Dodiya, Bhavna Navina Sundaram, Atul Dodiya, Mithu Sen, Dr. Goswami, Sadanand Menon, Tasneem, Mehta, and maybe somebody sitting. There was Nanak Ganguly, he's hiding somewhere. You can imagine what is going to happen in the question answer session, as we had some very, very pertinent questions from Sadanand and Atul Dodiya, and after that from Nanak Ganguly. We'll begin this evening with Anju Dodiya, then after that Sadanand Menon. After that they'll share a dialogue between themselves and the audience.
Thank you very much, and Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi, Diwan, outstanding work and very thoughtfully put together 6 or 7 days. After Anju's presentation, Diwan has given the caveat that those who need to leave should wait for the end. I would suggest you leave at the beginning, because after Anju's absolutely sublime work and presentation, this is going to be really profane and quite boring. There's nothing to show except myself, so you may have to sit through it. And I basically want to talk about, we've been talking about artists and their work, and I don't consider really myself as an artist, but there is something about representational work around the arts that raises certain questions. Artists, of course, represent. The writer on the arts and the artist represents a representation. Now, why can't that also be art? Would be a question that we need to reflect on. Why does writing around the arts have to be dull and uninspiring and dense, and a special kind of Greek and Latin into which you can't enter, etc. So I think these are issues that both artists and the universe around the arts will need to ask and will need to reflect on. And since it considers something that I have been doing for some years, I thought I would basically ask a few questions, a few reflections around it. It's not exactly a lecture or a thesis, it's just a set of rambles. I hope some of the rambles connect. So before I begin, I want to begin with a story. It's a Zen story, and particularly with respect to art and representation, it's always useful to go to Zen, because they really solve a lot of problems for you. So this story is about a young person, like many of you in the audience, who wanted to learn drawing and art, drawing and painting. So he looks across and he finds a rather elderly master who was sitting and doing some work. And he goes across to him and says, "Master, I want to learn painting." So the master is very busy doing his work, and he doesn't look up, and he just picks up a piece of paper and hands it over to him and says, "Look up there on the wall, there's a cat sitting there, go and draw the cat." So this young man is very happy. He goes up, he sits with the pencil and the paper, and he draws the cat. Comes back, gives it to the master. The master doesn't look at it. He picks up another piece of paper and gives it to him, "Go and draw the cat." So he goes back and he makes this trip up and down probably four or five times that day, keeps drawing the cat, brings it back, the master says, "Go and draw the cat again." Next day he comes, the master doesn't look up at him, he just gives him the paper, "Go and draw the cat." So he does that. So this khel, if you want, this play continues for days and then weeks and then months, and slowly the frequency of the young man who wants to be the artist visiting the master begins to be less and less. If it was 5 times a day, then it becomes 3 times a day, then becomes 2 times a day, then becomes once in 2 days. So the frequency becomes less and less. Months pass, years pass, and so on. And every time he comes to the master, all he has to say is, here's a piece of paper, go and draw the cat. Of course, the story doesn't tell us what the cat was doing all the while, but you have to imply that this is a Zen story. So the cat is very much part of the game. And then after many years, gap of 4-5 years, meanwhile, the student has become old and wiser. The teacher has a long white beard touching the floor. So after a long gap, the student comes back again, and this time the master looks up and he says, have you drawn the cat? And the man says, sir, I don't know if I've drawn the cat, but now I know that I have become the cat. And I think this introduces us to a very interesting, let's say, issue of this whole idea of representation. I mean, seeing Anju's work, for example, it brings me very close to that story, because this whole need to look at representation, albeit if it's a self-representation, where does it take you? What is that journey all about? And this whole question of immersion in the work, immiseration in the work, the erasure of difference between the subject and the object. I mean, after all, isn't that one is ultimately aspiring for? To wipe out the difference and so on. So you have schools of thought. There's a school of thought that would believe in reality as coextensive with representation. Reality and representation as being coextensive. They are like on the same linear plane. As against a school which will believe that representation of reality is undesirable and well nigh impossible. So you have this schools of thought that have been part of the history of art, the history of representation across centuries. For example, the Islamic idea of fana, but there's a mystical obliteration of the difference between the object and its creator. You aspire for that state, that beautiful, mystical, Sufi state if you want, Zen state if you want, where these differences go away. But when you start writing about it, when you start wanting to explain it, then certainly you posit a difference. You posit a difference between the object and the subject, something that is out there and something that about which something needs to be said. And this brings us to some very interesting predicaments in art. And I've heard about this I've not seen it, but I've read about this wonderful work by, it's a very famous project by the American artist Trevor Paglen, where it's called The Black World. And it's a fascinating project because it's also a highly dangerous political project. It's an ongoing multimedia documentation of clandestine US, American, secret military installations, for which Trevor operates below the radar of public scrutiny, sets himself up in camps in deserts, outside vast restricted areas of military bases, and as you know, they're very, very high security zones, and photographs them using high-powered telescopes and assembling these into a extraordinary mosaic, a tapestry of a universe that is doing nothing but this, nothing but surveying you, monitoring you, recording you, pulling out data from everywhere from every corner of the world, but which is all nebulous, meaning you can't touch it, it's all secret, it's as if it doesn't exist. There's no acknowledgement of that in real life. No newspapers write about this. But here is this one artist who's dedicated his entire life to doing this, and then staying below the radar of scrutiny so that he doesn't get hauled up immediately and put in, where, Guantanamo or wherever. So the images that he then produces are taken at night, taken in all sorts of inhospitable conditions for photography, and they become like photographs that you are probably looking at of, say, the late 19th century. So you open a chest and you suddenly come across a set of photographs which are fading, which has just got some traces on it. I remember seeing this absolutely extraordinary box of photographs that Aditya Arya brought to show me. Aditya Arya is a photographer who discovered completely by chance something that his family friend Kulwant Roy had left behind, a set of 36 cardboard boxes that were full of photographs taken by him in the 1930s, 40s and 50s, and which shows you the political scenario of that time, of Nehru and Jinnah and Gandhi and so on, and the conversations between them, the tensions between them, all that wonderfully captured by photographs, accidentally found in 36 boxes left behind by Kulwant Roy in the family garage almost, which Aditya accidentally opens and accidentally comes across, and then we have this amazing cache of material today, which gives you a closer insight into that period along with the works of Homai Vyarawala and so on. So one box he picks up and opens, it's a set of 4x4 images, 4x4 prints, which have got fungus. And it's amazing that the fungus, one corner of the box, the fungus is brown colored, in another corner it's blue colored, in the third corner there's a green coming up. It's like a fantastic tapestry of fungi. And the images are like miraculously surviving in some sort of a nebulous virtual kind of way. And he had brought it to Chennai to show it to a friend of mine who's a great restorer of images, and we took it together to show it to him, and he of course shook his head and said, no, it's better to leave it like this. We can't do anything with it because you'll lose the existing trace also. So the kind of work that Trevor Paglin is doing is actually with this kind of trace. He calls it photographic documentation, but all you get in those images are these amazing traces of something that is there. And just looking at those traces then, you understand, and then you understand with a shock, you get startled, the ability of power, of hegemonic power, of state power, to hide and snuggle into images. And for me, as a writer, as someone who's reflecting on works of art of all kinds, visual, performative, cinematic, and so on, my quest is that I don't want to describe, I don't want to tell you the story that is going on. I want to look at every single image to try and excavate, if possible. It's an act of excavation. Where does the power reside? Who does that power speak to? Where does that power find that inroad to snuggle in? And of course, you learn a lot from some of the postmodernist theoreticians. For example, someone whom I like to quote often, Michel Foucault, the French philosopher who's no more, who has warned us about contemporary societies. In earlier societies, power was more visible. You had a king who had divine authority, power resided there. In imperial systems, you know where power resides. But in contemporary society, power has performed this very interesting act of dissolving. And not dissolving anywhere, but dissolving into our consciousnesses, our bodies. What Foucault calls the capillary absorption of power and hegemony in our systems. Don't blame the government. Don't blame the prime minister, chief minister, president, governor, this, that. It's there in you, in us. It's entered through the pores. We have absorbed it. Given a chance, we will exercise that power in exactly the same way that the state exercises power. And I'd like to be able to unravel that. Foucault, the way he describes this, I get the feeling that you must wake up every day morning, and before you do anything else, just sit up in your bed and imagine, fantasize like an artist would do. Imagine what terror, what infamy, what depredation, what oppression am I going to support today? And then work the whole day consciously against it. Almost like working against yourself. And it's almost like that. You come to that state where we have become those kind of carriers. We have become viral carriers of systems that are oppressive. Now, I'd like to suggest that many or almost all representations within art have that little corner. Sometimes it's right in the middle, right in the center, sometimes it's tucked away in an edge somewhere, sometimes it's in the curl of a shadow, sometimes it's in the shade of a line. It's there. And we need to be able to have the skill, have the concern, have the need to prize it out, to discover that other story that is being told. One story is the story of the artist, which runs like a narrative. But the narrative has a subtext, it has a meta text, there's something happening below, there's something below the surface. It's like an iceberg where something is showing, but much more is hidden below, and that needs to come out. And we need to be able to learn to do that. And I personally believe the job of people who write in the media, art historians, art theoreticians, students of art, etc., would be to participate in that kind of a excavative exercise. And to the extent that it is not done, it is obviously a cop-out. It's obviously you are letting go something which is so crucial to your own well-being. Now, but then all art is representational, and the media noise around it can only be translated as representations of the representation. The question is, can this representation at second remove also be seen to qualify as art of a specific kind? So I personally believe that only when we participate in that exercise, we'll be able to do justice to the claim that as a writer, you can also be considered as important, if not more, as the artist herself. Now, the debate has some history in both modern and pre-modern paradigms around the issues of the creative acts of perception and transmission. The invisible unfolds to perception through the filter of information. The images we see are products and processes of information. So our perceptual culture is really the byproduct actually of an information culture. And you'll see this, if you see the history of modern art over the last probably 200 or 250 years, it has gone parallel. It's gone parallel to the emergence of the information culture. The act of perceptual clarity, the act of visual clarity, the act of being able to read something clearly as if you're reading a book and you're reading through words, an image like this. And one has to learn to arrive at it. How does one read this as clearly as you would read the text in front of you? If you're not doing that, or if you're not attempting to do that, then obviously we are lagging one step behind. We are letting that language bypass us. And I think it's our responsibility at the moment not to allow these languages to bypass us. We should be able to respond to these languages, be able to read them, interpret them, be able to be engaged with them. Now, however, the need to undo the influence of polluting subjectivities around these concepts has been common in both the time frames, whether it's modern, pre-modern. In both the time frames, the caveat, the warning has always been given that keep your reading clear of your own subjectivity. Try to rise above your subjectivity. Try to, otherwise the whole reading gets polluted. It's like I don't like the color yellow. I don't like the color red. So it's a bad painting. It becomes like that. So and one finds increasingly today in the age of the huge, growth of the media. It's like a galloping growth of the media across India, of course, but around the world. The textual media, the digital media, the visual media as in television, etc. There's a galloping growth. And in all this, instead of devices through which one can interpret, analyze, and dissect, we are coming very, very dangerously close to quick opinion being delivered as considered thought and philosophy. An opinion, I mean, I have always said opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. There's no need to make a special song and dance about it. So, but the media has become a space for that. The media has become a space for this kind of rapid, opinion making, which never really adds on to a information about what this perception is delivering to you, the perception of an artist. Now, where exactly then does the position of the critic, let's say, fall in this? And one is talking about this universe of art critics. Today, they are as ubiquitous as artists. If there are 200 artists in this state, I'm sure there are 200 art critics too. And they come in all sorts of shapes and manners. But for me, the starting point of a critical, let's say, perception would be the acknowledgement that there is a conflict out there in society, and all artistic production is a product of that conflict. Some of the artworks help and contribute towards masking that conflict, and therefore we call them ideological. You know on whose side the artist is. You know which power block that artist speaks for. But they become clever, they know how to hide it. Now, I can say with some shame, some sense of shame, that during the Kargil conflict, which is not all that far back, literally every Indian artist supported the Kargil war in manners that were really despicable, where they're saying things like, oh, hamare jawan jo border pe hai, unko, I mean, they're not seeing war as a product, not of the poor jawan, but the jawans are just, cannon fodder in this. Of course you can support them, of course you can empathize and sympathize with them, but war is not something of the creation of the soldier. War is a creation of a completely different, invisible power block. Now, instead of bringing that invisible out into the open and unmasking them, the artist just gets onto the pulp patriotic bandwagon and thereby creates sets of works which are inauthentic by any yardstick, by any stretch of the imagination, and in one sense, I would call them bad art, because they are so tremendously ideological. And if you want parallels in history, then the best moment to look at it is there everywhere. It's there in every state, in every situation. The most dramatic parallels will be in Nazi Germany, where it was very clear where certain sets of artists were standing. Leni Riefenstahl, the kind of films she was making, whom was she for and whom was she against? So this kind of little historic, references are very important to understand this. So you have this one set of art which helps to contribute towards masking that conflict and is thus ideological, whereas there is another set of artists and works of art that helps to foreground that conflict, that helps to push it right to the front without, pussyfooting around it, as they say. And therefore, you would call that political art, where there is no ambiguity, there is no space for that kind of ambiguity. So the conflict itself might be largely invisible. Sometimes we call it in history as class conflict, or sometimes it's more palpable as a conflict over power. So there are idealizing and utopian attitudes to art that deliberately ignore or neutralize this conflict, like say a position that, for example, say festivals are a marker of social unity. You take any festival, Christmas and Diwali and Chhat Puja, and these are all markers of social unity. Or arts and religion are collective impulses that affirm human relationship, and this is one of the positions that Heidegger had, this great German philosopher of culture, that they affirm human relationships. But then there can be more hermeneutic readings and interpretations to these arts, which engage with the restoration of meaning. And this, I think, is extremely important in the realm of discourse around art, where eventually it's all about meaning. I look at this and say, what does this mean? I mean, Anju herself said it's possible for anyone to look at works like this. Say, acha, dekh liya. There are figures, there is color, there are shapes, there are forms. It's beautiful. But for heaven's sake, will someone tell me what does it mean? And this is the attitude of many, let's say, art writers too. For heaven's sake, tell us what it means. And it's not just visual art. I've seen this attitude in theater, I've seen it in music, I've seen this in dance. It's wonderful, but for heaven's sake, what the hell is it all about? Now, how does one read? So, this need to, first of all, think about art as if there is a story in it, and that story has to make sense to you. I mean, none of us stands in front of a sunrise over Sukhna Lake and say, what does it mean? I mean, it's ridiculous. But we think about standing in front of a work of art or a piece of music and say, oh, what does it mean? Now, this need to rationally understand creative works is one of the problems of contemporary times. It's a kind of canker. We have forgotten to feel. You don't say, what is my experience? I'm standing in front of something. Now, what is my experience? Is it possible to define that experience? So, this is something that somehow seems to have been marginalized in the discourse around art. And I seriously believe that the need to discover the intended meanings and then do something to restore the meaning to the work is an important task that anyone who's going to be writing or reflecting around art will have to think about and take up. Like recently there has been, in 2005 was the year of Ibsen. I don't know whether in Chandigarh it was reflected, but certainly in Bombay, in Bangalore, in Delhi, there were Ibsen festivals and many plays were done. And you can't imagine the number of plays that came up, the number of interpretations, contemporary interpretations of Nora's Doll's House. And those who have read it, the famous last scene where Nora finally walks out of her husband's house, a play written in the late 19th century, very radical for its times, because Nora walks out of her husband's house saying, I'll be independent and free, but she doesn't say it. What does she do? She bangs the door shut. And that's where the play ends. The door bangs with a shut. I mean, the door shuts with a bang. So, and it was left like that. And Strindberg's play, Ibsen's play, and it was performed as such on stage at that time. But today, almost 100 years later, with the interventions of the feminist movement, with the influence of the new sexual politics, every theatre person, every actress is interpreting this shutting of the door in a completely new and powerful way, where the play changes completely. It's no longer that little tame play of domestic conflict where a wife is just walking out of the house. It's like women are saying no to you. It's almost become like that. And that kind of restoration of meaning to an original context becomes extremely important to be able to attempt in the spaces that are available. And I think you won't get this in the mainstream. I'm saying it with some concern because I belong to the mainstream media in one sense. For about 7 years in the 1990s, I was the arts editor for the Economic Times. And in front of our eyes, we saw one by one the Times of India group shutting down the arts pages, began with Times of India, moved to the Economic Times. And when the Times group did it, then every other newspaper across the country thought there's some great marketing strategy out there. So Indian Express shut down its 8 pages a week, Weekend Pull-Out, which was being edited by Tarun Tejpal those days. The Telegraph had an 8-page pull-out which was being edited by Chidanand Dasgupta. That got shut down. Hindustan Times closed down, Pioneer closed, all the art sections. And each of these papers had arts editors. All the arts editors were sent home. They all become in the Jurassic Park. They have not come back again. So it's like it's like a chain reaction that happened, and this was about 17 years ago. And the media today is nicely sanitized of any arts coverage. All you have is everything converted into entertainment. So I'm actually waiting. I have many, I teach in this College of Journalism in Chennai, where I conduct a course in arts and culture journalism. I was hoping that some of them would be here in Chandigarh. I was waiting for them to be sent to me by their own news editors or city editors saying, go and talk to him, but don't talk about art and art writing and all that. Find out what does he drink in the morning for breakfast, what movie does he see, which hero does he like, and so on. So this has become the quality of media coverage, mainstream media coverage. I say this with some pain because I think we have lost something. Till the mid-90s, there was a healthy, very healthy discourse in mainstream media about this. And as some of the pages that I edited would testify, some of the finest writers in the country and from abroad, some of them are sitting here in the front row, wrote in those pages, and it was something very special. But today, those spaces have been taken over by the need for filling these spaces with entertainment, because that's how the media has traveled. Everything has become, including politics. I mean, you can have some great tragedy happening somewhere, but the headline will remind you of some cricket score or something. That whole need to entertain readers. Now, is it the fault of the media? Is it the fault of the reader, the public? One doesn't know, because, for example, a paper like the Times of India, the more it dumps down, the higher its circulation goes. And it's today the world's highest selling English language newspaper. And it's kind of almost unreadable because of the, fluffy stuff that it carries. So I personally believe that the function and process of criticism is to unravel that which is hidden. Criticism does not need to describe or explain or endorse. It has to excavate and socialize that which struts about as individual. As personal opinion. There's no personal opinion in this. It's a social context within which opinions are being expressed, and that sociality has to be expressed, I particularly feel. As Frederick Jameson might say, criticism posits the arts as a socially symbolic act. And if you're not able to read it as such, it's our loss. There's a wonderful pedagogue from Brazil who's no more, but when I was in my university days, I grew up with this gentleman. His name is Paulo Freire. All of us used to, the books were not available in India, but we used to cyclostyle copies and distribute everybody. And Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, it's a very, very important text even today, even though now it's kind of, nobody talks about it and it's kind of forgotten. But here's another important book called Learning to Question, in which he writes, and I quote, "There is a radical element to existence, which is the radical act of asking questions." And I think you see this coming from the side of the creator. The artists are doing it. The artists are certainly playing that game of asking questions. Questions about themselves, questions about interpersonal relations, questions about society, questions about future, questions about the past, questions about history. All the certainties are being questioned. The artists are doing it. We can't really hold them to task for not doing it. They are doing it. But where is this from the side of the art writer, the art historian, the art theoretician? Less and less, I would say. There was a time when this was a preoccupation, but you find the whole decline of this that is rampant in our times. So critical thinking requires us to use our imagination in seeing things from perspectives other than our own and envisioning the likely consequences of our positions. But this calls for radical openness and to be wary of falling into the trap of falling in love with one's own ideas. This inability to change one's position. For me, one of the finest moments in my, learning curve, if you want, was something that happened in 1999. And many of the artists here would know that event. It was an exhibition in London called Sensation. Many of you have heard about it, which was an exhibition of 35 of Great Britain's best young artists below the age of 35. 35 artists below 35, happening at the Tate Gallery. And it also had the first exhibit in public of a certain gentleman called Damien Hirst, whom today it's like a household name, everybody knows. But Damien Hirst had that work in their exhibition called The Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, etc., etc., which was this huge 27-foot long shark, very beautiful, very sleek, put in a glass cage with formaldehyde, and great aerodynamic, nature's work of art kind of thing. But you go behind the glass case, he had sliced the shark in half, and you could see the intestines and the innards, and so people would go and start vomiting, and they couldn't handle it and stuff like that. There was another artist who had piled up 30 days of his own shit in a glass case and called it tower and so on. So all sorts of provocative stuff was there. Yeah, I can see that lady there already making a face. But this was the artist's way, and these are people below the age of 35, very young people. They're asking questions. And interestingly, there was a huge furor against it. People rose up, the art community said this is not art. The art writers said this is all bunkum, it's a scam. The church people got tremendously upset. This is, you're spoiling our morality and moral values. The education institution said we will not send our students there, etc., etc. So the whole thing grew, and within a period of less than a month, I think, the exhibition had to be closed down. It was supposed to be on for 6 months, but within less than a month, it was closed down. But before the exhibition started in Tate, it had already been booked to go to Brooklyn Museum in New York. So on the appointed date, 6 months later, it goes to Brooklyn. The notoriety of the exhibition has already preceded it in Brooklyn. So even before the exhibition comes there are people standing with placards outside Brooklyn Museum saying, we don't want this here, this is depraved, debauched, whatever, all kind of words are being used. Nevertheless, the exhibition opens. The New York Times writes a first day review, which is a devastating review. It just condemns it, tears it to shreds, saying this is just complete rubbish. You've not seen anything like this. It's a mockery of the notion of art, etc., etc. And a review like that in the New York Times can kill an exhibition. But in this case, it brings a huge crowd outside, demonstrators, protesters, this, that, and the other. And it looks like the exhibition will close within 1 week. There at least it lasted a month. Here it looks like it will close in 1 week. Until 5 days later, comes in a small magazine out of New York and San Francisco, a magazine called The Nation. It's something like the Economic and Political Weekly here, very small magazine, where one of the finest philosopher writers on the arts in America resides, I would say in the world, Arthur C. Danto, a great writer on the arts. And he writes an 8-page article in The Nation about this exhibition. He begins by saying, I went to visit this exhibition with my 8-year-old nephew, and then proceeds for the next 2 pages to describe what the nephew is saying. So he stands in front of the shark and all the gruesome innards and says, oh, wow. And he stands in front of the tower of shit and he says, oh, gee, and so on. So he's getting excited. He's not seen anything like this before, and he's completely in it, and for him it's a beautiful game. Arthur C. Danto's point was simply this: where have you people left your childhood behind? Where has that wonder gone? Why aren't you able to participate in this bunch of young artists who's asking serious questions to you? Why are you reacting in that kind of defensive manner, etc.? And then he goes on to describe the importance of each of those works. Just that one article, The Tide Turns. 3 days later, the very same New York Times critic writes a piece apologizing for his original position. And he begins by saying, I read Arthur Danto's piece and I went to see the exhibition again. And I must say, I was wrong somewhere. I'm changing my opinion. I'm rethinking the work. So he spent a whole day with the works and he rewrote the piece. And slowly the protesters drifted away and audiences came, and this became a huge, huge success. And all the artists, most of them became very well-known names across the world. But what they did, that act of little subversion they did, remains like a landmark, meaning it becomes a benchmark now for young artists to think in those terms, to recalibrate the fixed notions of what is meaningful, what is good art, what is aesthetic, what will be accepted, what will be rejected, and this whole discourse was sent for a toss at that point. So I think for me that was a great learning experience in terms of...
The exhibition was brought down by Diwan.
Brought down?
Nonetheless, the exhibition was
Yeah,
brought down by Diwan.
yeah, it would happen, but the point is, yeah, exactly. So there's a whole history to this. I'm not going into this. I'm just saying it changed that movement, and the fact that a critic who's concerned, an art historian who's concerned, can change the way general public opinion is drummed up is a learning for us. I mean, as opposed to that, recently Ashok Vajpeyi was here a few days ago, and the Raza Foundation, of which he is the trustee, has brought out a fantastic book produced by the Raza Foundation and Pablo Bartholomew. It's a collected writings, critical writings of Richard Bartholomew. And it's fabulous because for the first time that kind of compilation of an art writer has been done. Other things, the projects are on the anvil now, Geeta Kapoor, etc. are on the anvil, but the Richard Bartholomew thing is really valuable because it shows us what kind of serious and important writing around the arts was happening in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And this is an essay. I'm going to read a few lines from a particular essay he wrote called Criticism in India in 1969. And tell me what this sounds to you like. He says, in this age, criticism is the correlate of creativity. When art was primitive, it was criticism itself. It's a very interesting point, that art itself was the criticism. Art and all art is a product of criticism. So the fact that if you don't have a critical culture, actually it's difficult for the artist to create is a point that is very, very brilliantly brought out here. And I can name today in contemporary Indian art society at least 10 major Indian artists, young, who are below the age of 30 or 35, something like that, about whom not a single critical piece has appeared anywhere in India, in the press. And I would say that points to a crisis. Because if artists are producing, it's like saying you don't write anything about your members of parliament from here. It's almost tantamount to saying something like that. It's like, acha, karne do jo karna hai. I mean, we are not concerned. Then what kind of democratic practice are you indulging in? What kind of society are you wanting to create? So the fact that Richard Bartholomew recognized it even as far as back that is very interesting. He also says, he's saying this in 1969, much of criticism today is non-functional. Critics are timid, non-committal, and have no zeal to crusade for the arts. They have neither the courage nor stamina to wage a relentless war against false and mistaken values. Rings a bell? Does it ring a bell? I think it's in 1969 this is beginning. He further says, it is a function of criticism to activate analysis, experimentation, and discussion. We also need criticism of criticism. We need to foster new art movements. So I think it's an important position that Richard Bartholomew put forward as far back as that. But like I said, in our times, we seem to have regressed. We seem to have taken not 2 or 3, but several steps back, and we are not able to get back to that engagement with the arts. At a time where historically, across the world, we see a regression of the arts. We see that even that moment of sensation was a sensational moment because that was probably one of the few occasions in the last 2 decades when art punched through. It went through a kind of a social, amnesia and a kind of a strange barrier that has come up, where artists are not able to really make a dent in our own social circumstances. That's a peculiar situation. In the last 20-25 years, we've seen that the artists, and this is across the board from all the arts, it's not happening. And you have to do extra amounts of sensationalism, extra amounts of effects to, achieve that. This fantastic art historian called Hal Foster, who teaches in Columbia, has suggested that in moments when art is on the retreat, it is possible for art theory to proceed. Sometimes art is moving ahead and theory follows. But it's possible in certain historic occasions for theory to move ahead and art can then at least revive and follow that. But it's happening probably in some parts of the world. In India, I dare say, there is a lag from both sides. And one of the reasons is probably attributed to the tremendous increase in the visual bombardment we are receiving from the electronic media, where everything is high-pitched, everything is hyper, 6-frame editing, everything is coming at you with a tremendous sensational effect. And we had this historical moment in 2001 after the two planes went into the Twin Towers in New York, where one of Germany's great music composers, Karl-Heinz von Stockhausen, was about to give a concert in Hamburg, Navina city, in front of an audience of 2,000 people, and everybody is assembled and his 120-piece orchestra is sitting, and Stockhausen walks onto the stage, picks up his baton, then turns to the musicians, stands completely paralyzed, turns around to the audience, puts the baton down and says into the mic, we artists work all our lives to create affect. The lovely German word, affect. Affect is that which transforms you, that which touches you, that which changes you. We work all our lives to create that effect. I have worked like that all my life, through my music to create that effect. But these fellows with those planes managed to change all that in a few minutes. They have created the kind of effect that I can never create in my life through my music. And it's changed visual perception around the world. What am I doing with my music? The kind of anxiety that Anju talked about. What does an artist do in moments like this? He put down his baton, walked out. It was a how do you say, historically charged moment for Germany, because the German ambassador in Washington had to apologize for this act of the great German composer. His own daughter disowned him, saying, "What do you mean you're supporting those terrorists who took the plane in?" But the fact that it's becoming more and more difficult for artists to create that effect. To, again, the issue that Anju raised, everything demands speed, more quantity, increase in hype. What about slowness? No space for that. It's seen as a regression or a bad thing to do sort of thing. So anyway, the point is this whole crisis in the arts and writing around the arts has now come to represent this kind of a social paralysis, where in order for art to be able to reach out and speak something, you will have to do a sensation. Without the sensation, nothing seems to move. It becomes another little act. It's meant for a market, it's meant for the elite, and it somehow seems to be staying in that location, at least in the Indian context. Now, along with this comes certain problematic. This is what I've personally been bothered about in my career as a writer on the arts. I mean, I didn't begin as a writer on the arts. My first 15 years in journalism was as a political journalist. It's only when I saw this lack of politics in art writing that I slowly made the shift, just because I had been exposed through very dear friends of mine to different kinds of arts. I kind of voluntarily made that shift. Sometimes I do lapse into what's called political writing, but I've decided that writing about arts and culture is as political as anything else. But I have this problematic, it's a theoretical problem of art history in India, which I believe is tremendously linear. And that's one of the problematics of being able to come to grips with our context. For example, a question, I mean, it's like E.H. Carr, the great historian, said, when you treat history linearly, it's almost like counting the beads in a rosary, as if one thing comes out after the other. So when was Indian modernism? So if you track back, you say, okay, currently it's modernism. Is it modernism? We don't know. Maybe it's postmodernism. But go a little few years before. So then you say, okay, the progressives, there was a Progressive Artists Association, the Progressive Artists Group. Maybe they were the first moderns. Then no. As Navina would have suggested yesterday, no, Amrita Sher-Gil was among the first moderns. No, but Nanak would say, take it back to the Bengal school. Yeah, that they were the first moderns. No, go back to Ravi Verma, that was probably the first modern. Then probably Professor Goswami will say, no, take it back to the miniaturists. And so it's a linear thing. But the point is, simultaneously, many things are happening. If Ravi Verma is painting located in Baroda and Pune, the effect of that is happening in South India. Printing presses are starting in Shivakashi. They are producing all kinds of reproductions of oleographs. That is doing something to visual culture there. It's changing the way people look at. So this tremendous cross thing that is going on simultaneously in different places, that I believe has really not been addressed by contemporary Indian art historians. And it's somewhat like what Claude Lévi-Strauss, the great anthropologist, writes in that Noble Savage, that history is not like one tree that is growing like that. There is simultaneously branches and leaves are shooting off in all sorts of places. And if you're not able to capture that picture, you're missing out something. So Indian art history cannot be, and I'm saying this with great emphasis, cannot be the history only of painting. It has to be also the history of all sorts of other expression. You go into a Gond village, and what do you see? Everybody there paints, everybody there sings, everybody there dances. But do they call themselves painters? No. Do they call themselves singers? No. Do they call dancers? No. They are just people who are living their life. But how do you integrate them into that history? But there are many artists today who cannot live without, bouncing off the Gond artist or the Warli artist or whatever. You have to pick out their creativity and insert it into your modern work or postmodern work as a quotation. But what about them who have been practicing this for years and centuries? So this whole lapse of, I would say, art historical practice into a linear mode has been of great damage to understanding of art here. And of course, there's been pretty little acknowledgement within the art history of, for example, processes in design, in photography, in ceramic, in architecture. There's very little effort to pull it all together. And I keep saying, for the last few years, I've been saying this loudly from any platform that I get. For example, the historic ignorance about someone like Dashrath Patel, who just passed away 2 years ago. And we don't talk about him in any forum as an artist of any kind. But he was sharing the same studios with your Hussain and your Tayyab Mehta and your Akbar Padamsi and your Guy Tonde. He was in the same space. He went to the same art schools as all of you went. He learned photography from Cartier-Bresson. He set up the National Institute of Design. He was a leading ceramist, Professor Eckert, high art in Czechoslovakia. How come nobody talks about him? How come there's such ignorance about a person like that, an artist like that? So these holes in art, I call them black holes in art history, need to be somehow addressed by the artist community itself and by institutional, reflections around art itself. I think one can have an entire 1 week symposium on art history and its problems in a space like this. And then, of course, the canons get all closed. All the canons you lock up, and you then historically ignore all these things. For example, there's been a historic ignoring, I would say, of the South. I come from, I'm born in Kerala, but I live in Tamil Nadu, and I see the kind of work that is going on there in Karnataka, in Andhra, in Tamil Nadu, and by no sense is it inferior from anything that's going anywhere in the world, or at least in the rest of the subcontinent. But in art historical discourse, kept apart. You don't talk about it. Once in a way, okay, by the way, acha, there was a Madras metaphor, something like that. The first arts college in India started in Madras, for heaven's sake. 1850, the very first college happened there. It's still running. Still products are coming out of it. E.B. Havell taught there. E.B. Havell later went to College of Art in Calcutta. We don't talk about it. we keep out native artists, we keep out alternate sexualities, we keep out caste. Now, I think there's some huge problem in this, and I mean, without wanting to talk about myself, the kind of attempts I did try to do in the arts pages in the Economic Times, we used to have 4 pages a week for the arts, full pages, no advertisements. We could do what we wanted. One of the attempts was to bring this mosaic into the page, where you look at what's happening simultaneously in different parts of India, in different disciplines, in different arts, and make that conversation resonant with this kind of interdisciplinary, kind of a nuance. And it's like trying to rewrite the art map of our times in one sense. So I think I'm really stepping out of my time limit. I had also something to say about our times now, when, I mean, here we're talking as if media is separate from the art. Media is looking at the art from outside. But our times are also enriched by the fact that so many artists, and you've had examples throughout the last 4 days, artists who are using media themselves, whether it's photography, whether it's video, whether it's movie, whether it's digital art, it's come into mainstream art practice. And when that happens, it's a kind of an attempt to break with the purity of the form in one sense. And new terms have come up like multimedia, mixed media, intermedia, and so on, which describe these hybrid amalgams that are offered, that offer the arts a chance to get out of the white cube of the gallery. This has been the journey for the last, the artists of the last 20 years, the need to come out of the gallery. It began with Hussain, for example, doing his Visarjan in the early 1990s and so on, questioning the work of art itself, the holy grail of the art object, wanting to move away from that holiness, that objectification of art, and take it out. It's now kind of reached a point where no artist works purely with a medium. And Anju is a remarkable example who stuck to watercolors determinedly. I think it's quite fantastic. It's something very poetic about it. Now, the rupture with the past has become even bigger in the 1990s, when the rise of the digital media inspired many to believe that nothing would ever be the same again. The new media would lead art into a paradigmatic shift from the analog to the digital, from the passive to the interactive, from producer to consumer, from real to virtual, and from visual to the synesthetic. So all around us we have computer screens, LED screens, mobile phones, and other handheld devices, the TV screen subdivided into streamer flows of information, signages in advertising, commercial radio and audio alerts that fill the urban soundscape. Today, luckily, we don't have the music from outside. But all of these demand cognitive attention, not as sensual material anymore to be experienced, but as information to be processed. In this new media art and the arts of the information age are in generic and iconic, meaning the iconic nature of art now has been dismantled in one sense through this new digital age. In the new millennium, the challenge for media art and its academic reflection seems to be a distancing from or even a subversion of the discourse of the new. Probing questions that fuel such efforts are: should we stop looking at the technological aspect of new media art and instead look at more structural characteristics? Another question: in what ways can we compare such characteristics to older analog forms of art? Another question: should one practice media archaeology and media art history instead of a discourse on the new based on ruptures and paradigmatic changes? 3 questions for you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Sadanandji. In the absence of that music, popular music, sound or noise, whatever we may call it, in this quiet moment of great intellectual discourse, triggered by Sadanandji, and in the presence of trickling sound of the rain outside, we've had this wonderful, presentation, which only, which makes me feel it is the trigger, but with the presence of all these great personalities here on this soil of Harappa and, Indus Valley civilization, we have the traces of that in the museum and maybe in the ancient history department of Punjab University somewhere. We feel really, really honored and privileged in the sense, is zameen pe, without really, being sentimental or emotional or trying to kind of be romantic, I really want to touch the soil where all these personalities have come. Because in the times to come, I really mean, I'm not emotional or, I really mean it, because in this very space where these people have, given these discourses, they have breathed in the space, it will linger longer in the memories of people. And Chandigarh and this area, this region will definitely benefit from it. Thank you so much, Sadanand ji.